where the skies listened to the Rainmakers, Zulu seers who called the storms and held the fate of the harvest in their hands. In the deep lands of southern Africa, where the Zulu people built their kingdoms and communities, life's rhythm was measured not by clocks, but by rain. Rain was the land's true calendar, telling them when to plant seeds, when cattle could eat freely, and when hunger might start. The skies were never thought to be empty or uncaring. They were a living picture where ancestors spoke through clouds, thunder, and lightning. At the heart of this talk stood the Rainmakers, those men and women who said and were believed to have the power to call rain from the heavens or to stop it. Their job was not just practical, but deeply spiritual, connecting the community to the land and the spirits that fed it. The Zulu people, like many groups who spoke Bantu languages, believed that ancestors were not lost when they died, but stayed as powerful unseen helpers shaping luck and destiny. And these Amadlozi were protectors who had to be honoured with special gifts and good behaviour. When rains didn't come, it was often thought to be a sign of their unhappiness or being forgotten. Rainmakers acted as people who understood what these ancestors wanted. Through special ceremonies, they tried to bring back peace between the living and the dead. They used herbs, sacred clays, songs and prayers to get help from the ancestors. Often, these ceremonies happened near rivers, waterfalls or holy hills, places where the line between human and spirit worlds was thought to be thin. The Zulu king himself carried spiritual importance as a guardian of good crops and rain. A strong ruler was judged not just by winning battles, but by whether the land did well under his rule. Old stories tell us that when there was a drought, people might question the king's right to rule. This wasn't because they thought he could control the weather, but because he was seen as the main link between his people and the world of the ancestors. He worked with rainmakers whose special knowledge and charm helped keep both the spiritual and natural balance. When the rains finally returned, it wasn't just nature's turn, but a sign of peace brought back between the king, community, and ancestors. Rainmakers were often not understood by people from outside. Early European travellers and missionaries who met them in the 1800s tended to think their rituals were just old superstitions. Yet even these people admitted the amazing power rainmakers had in society. A respected rainmaker could, receive gifts of cattle food and, well, a lot of respect. Yet if he didn't deliver, he might be accused of being careless or, even worse, of using his powers to cause harm. Some old stories, interestingly enough, describe rival communities accusing each other's rainmakers of stealing the clouds or sending storms away. Weather in this way became a kind of spiritual fight, where being able to give or deny water really did mean life or death. Part of what made rainmakers so interesting, I'd say, was that their art mixed rituals with careful watching of nature. They watched how birds flew, how plants bloomed, how insects behaved, and of course the wind's direction to know when rain was likely. Their ceremonies were often planned to happen at the same time as these natural signs, so that to many their power seemed to make nature do what they wanted. To the people, this amazing mix of knowledge and ritual proved, well, their power came from a higher place. To people today, it shows how understanding nature and cultural beliefs work together in ways that, kept societies going long before we had scientific weather forecasts. Stories also grew around certain rainmakers who seemed, well, bigger than life. Some were said to control storms with just a word, while others carried charms believed to hold thunder itself in their hands. There were tales of rainmakers who could split clouds to bring rain to one valley while leaving another dry. Whether these stories were real or just figures of speech, they show how important their presence was to what the community imagined. The spiritual power of rainmaking was not without danger. To fail was risky, you know. If rituals were done and no rain came, people might suspect the rainmaker. Perhaps the ancestors were too angry, or perhaps the ritual expert had made a mistake or acted selfishly. In bad cases, people might accuse them of witchcraft, and problems could split communities already suffering from drought. Yet this tricky role only made the rainmakers more mysterious as they walked a fine line between respect and fear. Zulu beliefs about the universe remind us that the natural world was never separate from the holy. Thunder and lightning were seen as signs of a divine presence, often linked to important ancestors. Rain itself was called Inkanyezi, a blessing from the heavens. When drops hit the earth, they were more than water, they were the ancestors answering their children. The rainmaker was the bridge who carried prayers up and brought blessings down. Over time, as colonial rule spread and Christian churches grew stronger, many of the traditional jobs of rainmakers were lost. Missionaries often said rainmaking rituals were pagan or fake, and new political systems weakened the power of ritual experts. Yet even as formal practice faded, the memory of the rainmakers lived on. In many rural Zulu communities, hints of the old ceremonies stayed woven into healing practices and seasonal celebrations. To this day, the respect for ancestors and the feeling of rain as a sacred blessing still mark Zulu culture. The rainmakers of old remind us of a world where the lines between nature and the divine were soft and alive. They show how societies saw survival in spiritual terms, turning weather into a conversation with ancestors and putting understanding of nature into their rituals. Their memory is part of a larger African heritage where the power of rain remains one of the deepest symbols of life, new beginnings and things continuing. Standing in the hills and valleys of KwaZulu-Natal, one can still imagine the old songs rising into the air, mixing with clouds, as if the old rainmakers still whisper to the skies, telling the waters of heaven to remember the people of the earth.